Good morning, Anna Crump. How are you?
Good morning, David. I am exceptional this morning. Thank you for asking.
You're because you're on holidays and graciously agreed to come and have a chat with me on a little podcast while you're on some vacay. So thank you very much.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Wouldn't couldn't be a podcast without you. So look, for those who may not know you, why don't you share a little bit about you and your background and your work in the disability space? Because some people you're like disability royalty, and for others they're like, who's Anna? So
Oh, wow. I
why
don't
don't
know
you share a
about
little bit about you?
royalty, but thank you. So I'm Anna. I am the business services manager for a company called Acme Support Services. I've only been with Acme for a couple of weeks, but very, very happy to join such an amazing team. Prior to working at Acme, if we go back a little bit, I worked at the Office of the Public Guardian for almost 10 years as a range of different positions. So I started as a liaison officer and then went into a guardian position, senior guardian, principal guardian, team leader, and also worked quite heavily in the restrictive practices space. So reviewing positive behaviour support plans to make sure they comply with the legislation, and making decisions for people that struggle to make their own decisions or don't have capacity to make decisions for themselves. After that, I went and worked at another service provider. So I left OPG after almost 10 years, just wanted to get out. As you can imagine, that job's pretty full on, but learnt
Yeah.
an absolute gut load working in that space. Then I went and worked at a company called Blue Iris, and I was a business relationship manager doing some compliance there as well, PROTA reporting, and that sort of thing. So I was there for about 18 months, and then was offered an amazing opportunity to come across to Acme. So, yeah, very excited about that. Prior to disability, I was working in maritime, funnily enough. I worked for the Australian Maritime Safety Authority for about 9 years as well. So, a bit of a varied and different path, but always
How
wanted
did
to
how
get
did how did you
into.
get into disability from outside the sector? What brought you into the sector?
Funnily enough, I was made redundant working at AMSA, and I've always had a passion for wanting to help people, and always kind of been one of those people that advocates for people that are less fortunate or need assistance, and help and that sort of thing. So a friend of mine actually worked at the Public Guardian, and she said to me, "Hey, we're looking for guardians. I think you'd be perfect at this job." And that was it was back in the days when there were the Office of the Adult Guardian. So I applied, and yeah, the rest is history, kind of, and found that it's where I wanted to be, working in the disability sector.
Wow. There's a good friend of ours in the SDA provider world. It's a company called Everhomes. They're a great provider, great people, and the
Absolutely.
directors there are ex public guardians as well. Did you work with those
They
guys?
are, yeah, Dan and Jess, yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful people. Our kids actually go to the same school. We live in the same area,
Oh
so
wow. God, it's a small community, isn't it?
yeah, it sure is. It sure is. But no, Dan and Jess, beautiful people, and a lot of people probably don't actually realize, but they're actually extremely musically talented,
Is that right?
as well. So they both sing, and Dan plays the guitar. If you ever have a
No,
chance to hear
I
them,
never knew that, but now I think about it, just his look, he's got that guitarist look, doesn't he?
he sure
Dan, if you're
does. Yeah,
watching,
so
dude, I'd love to hear you rip out some tunes one night. That'd be great.
absolutely. They're actually really good. Not that that should be surprising because they're fabulous people, but yeah, if you ever get a chance to hear them sing, grab onto it with both hands. So yeah,
There we
lovely
go.
people.
I'm going to
Yeah.
park that in the back of my brain. At some point, there'll be an event we're both at, and I'm going to hit them up.
Maybe we should co-host an event and they can be the musical
No, no
providers.
pressure. Hey, we're all going to have a great time. You're working. Uh, make it good.
Oh,
No
yeah,
pressure.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
So,
Yeah.
restricted
Mm,
practices and evolving
mm.
legislation. I'm going to take a bit of a swing in the dark here and say you've got some insights and passions and opinions about the robust category within SDA.
Oh, I sure do. So I guess one of those opinions is that I really wish that the NDIA would fund people appropriately. If you're funding someone in a robust category, generally the SIL funding should not sit at a 1 to 2 or a 1 to 3 model. Generally, someone that is subject to restrictive practices has a high level of behaviours. And yes, while they might need an SDA robust category, generally they're not appropriate to be living with others. So I guess, from a restrictive practices thing, I'm always thinking reduction and elimination of the use of restrictive practices if we can as a provider.
Yeah,
Giving back, because realistically the use of restrictive practices is a breach of someone's human rights, which is why it's so there's so much framework around it. And Queensland has some of the strictest legislation in the whole of Australia. Well, they do have the strictest legislation in the whole of Australia in relation to the use of restrictive practices and ensuring that services that are delivering those supports are doing it appropriately and ethically. So yeah, that's something that is really important to me, and I've worked with a lot of
when you
providers
were
who. Mm,
sorry, Anna, when you were with OPG, the number of people who look, I speak in the language of SDA provider, and I've
mm,
never been a SIL. A lot of our team at Disability Housing Solutions have worked with SIL. I haven't, so I kind of work. I speak SDA, right?
yep.
So with your work with OPG, is there a lot of people who would qualify or might have robust in their plan as an SDA that are still living in standard houses with sill, like sill houses, or does that not really happen so much?
No, previously we had a client when I was at Blue Iris who was living in a normal rental that did actually have robust SDA in her plan, and it was just I'm not too sure why she wasn't living in an SDA. I don't actually think that she needed to be living in an SDA. She had no mobility problems or anything like that. So we do see it from time to time, but I don't think it's a regular occurrence. Generally, if
I,
someone's in
I,
an
I just
SDA,
I just ask. I only ask because again, speaking SDA, one of the jobs an SDA home does, if you look outside the robust category, so for fully accessible and high physical support and
Mm,
independent living, there's the house does a lot of the heavy, right? So it lowers that requirement for for hands-on support. The
yeah.
house does some right. The doorways, the hoist, the benches that move, all of the technology that allows the participant to navigate their home themselves more versus
Mm,
maybe a non-modified or a standard home. And I'm wondering, you just spoke, and the reason I'm kind of thinking about this is you talked about, and I agree with you about the support funding packages for robust. They can't be one in three. There's one who's been around people with destructive behaviours for more than 3 seconds, and you can't have two or three of these guys live together.
mm,
So that said, a robust home within the SEA category, obviously it's impact resistant walls and impact resistant glass or screens on the inside, or it's built for destructive behaviours. How much would that alleviate the need for that hands on type support or modifying behaviours? I think, and I'm not using the right language because this is not
mm.
my area of expertise, but
Um, look, to be honest, my opinion is that a lot of robust, the NDIS's category of robust sometimes isn't robust enough.
mm-hmm.
That's one of the issues that we do see is that if we're able to prove to the NDIA that someone actually needs a robust category of property, it's because they have those really destructive behaviours. And I'm not too sure, why the NDIA's category of robust isn't robust enough. Look, I honestly don't think that it will limit behaviours. It will limit the financial impact to the participant if they are funded for robust and the robust properties are built to a specification that they need to be. But from a restrictive practices point of view, I don't believe that the category generally of the property will minimise the need for those restrictive practices.
Okay.
Mm,
I'm starting to form the opinion as I more and more with this, that the robust spectrum, right? The type of property and allowances and categories within that robust of robust, like 0 to 10, 10 being the most destructive, high needs, high levels, safe zones, exits, perspex tunnels, like the whole bit, all the way down to not that. If that makes sense. That's what I'm starting to sort of form the view, whether it's 10 or 5 categories, but
Yeah.
I think you can't just say, here's the design guidelines, robust, because it doesn't meet a lot of the needs out there. It really doesn't. So you've
Mm.
got to go way above the design guidelines, but there's no guidelines above the design guidelines for the
Yeah,
really
that's
high
it.
needs. And I
That's it.
spoke a friend of mine is a hospital bed manager in Brisbane, and I won't talk about specifics, but he spoke about there's a person with a disability in one of the major hospitals in the Brisbane Council area, who's got severe destructive behaviours, and there's nowhere that can take this person. There's just nowhere. And so at the moment, this person's taking up a whole room in a ward that would normally have 4 people in a public hospital. They're in there alone. All the other beds are out. Every day they've got to do repairs in there because they're tearing things off the walls. There's heavy security presence. It's tremendously expensive to keep this person confined because they have really severe destructive behaviours.
Mm.
And it's not good for the person. It's not good for the health outcome. It's not good for the hospital. They've
No.
just lost three other beds. It's not good for the community for the same reason. So, but there's no design guidelines for this person. There's nowhere that says, okay, in a situation like this, and they're rare, but they exist. That it's common enough that there perhaps should be some guidelines that says, okay, this person's funding, we need to elevate it quite substantially to have something built because ultimately it's going to save millions of dollars in the long
Mm.
term to get this person into appropriate accommodation versus
Yeah.
tear hospitals apart.
Yeah, and look, working as a guardian, I used to see those clients all the time, and unfortunately, there are very few SIL providers that actually have the ability to safely support those type of clients,
Yeah,
which is why they end up in a hospital setting. You know, and that's never the answer either. The answer is not we're just relinquishing care. It's too much. They're too much for us. Go into the hospital, and then we get those sort of situations where we already have a crisis with Queensland Health in relation to, you know, the beds and there never being enough beds in hospitals for people to where we're shutting down, you know, and taking beds away from people that actually need it. The
yeah.
other thing in that instance as well is that doctors and nurses, they're not appropriately trained. I mean, and the forensic system is not a good option for that either. So what is the answer?
That is the $500 million question, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a This is a societal issue. It's not a disability sector issue,
No.
right?
You know,
The
and I always say that behavior is a form of communication. So potentially finding out more information from this person if possible as to why, you know, and a lot of the times it'll be, you know, they're not able to control those urges, that, you know, the anger gets too much and then they don't know how to deal with it. But, you know, having those person-centered conversations with the individual about, you know, what do you want, where do you see yourself, you know, all of those sort of things is so important as well. And I think particularly in the NDIS, the person-centered care is not prioritized as much as it should be.
Isn't that an interesting thing to say? That in the NDIS, the person-centered priorities aren't where they should be.
Yep.
Do you want to talk some more about that?
Well, I mean, like I said, behavior is always a form of communication. So, you know, and time again, we're seeing decisions that are made by the NDIA where they don't have the forethought of we're making decisions for people with disabilities. And I think, to be honest, it's better now than it ever has been, if I'm
Hmm.
honest.
Yeah,
But
I think
previously,
I
you'd
think
have,
most reasonable people would agree with that. I think they would.
yeah, but you know, historically, people with disabilities were seen as, you know, institutionalized, or we
Yeah,
don't, out of sight, out of mind sort of thing. So, you will always find that you'll have more buy-in from people if you're actually communicating directly with them and saying, what do you want? So making decisions from a supported decision making framework rather than a substituted decision making framework is really important. Let's make this decision together. What do you want? Rather than just taking that decision away from them fully. So, in those sort of instances, finding out where those what is the cause of those behaviors from that person. Is it because they're hearing voices? Is it because they don't understand the options for choice, the choice and control around what options are available to them on discharge from hospital? Having a conversation with them to say, hey, we're finding it really difficult to find you somewhere to live because of these behaviours. So if we can work on the behaviours, that transition plan out of a hospital setting is so much easier, not only for the people that are supporting them, but for the person themselves, which is where our focus should be on.
Okay. So in a situation where that person's maybe under the care of the public guardian, and maybe doesn't understand that conversation, what are some of the solutions there?
You still have the conversation. You still have the conversation. And part of any sort of decision making framework is seeking views from interested parties. So family members, friends,
Uh-huh.
but person centered. So it's a wraparound around the actual individual. And even people that are non-verbal can still provide a view. It's just in a different way. It could be through a communication device. It could be through their body language. It could be, a range of different ways. So finding out views, wishes, and preferences from people that you're making decisions about is so important. It's not just this person lacks capacity, so therefore we take that decision making away from them. We still
Yeah.
include them in that decision making as much as we possibly can, and then we make a decision based on their views, unless, of course, the views are detrimental to the person's health and well-being, and then we have to, override it. But seeking views should be a holistic approach from people who know the person.
Now, is that happening more often than not, or is that not happening? Look, you're speaking with the ability of someone who's, I can hear it in how you're speaking and sharing. You spend a lot of time here. You've got real world hands on experience here. I can hear it, right? So, how often is what you're sharing? How often does that not take place?
Um, It depends on who you ask.
Okay.
If you're asking
Well,
SIL providers,
you had 10 years at the OPG. I mean, I think you're uniquely
well,
qualified to maybe talk about
well,
this.
look, I think that it also depends on the guardian, to be honest. Guardians, their workloads are so massive, and I know that that should not be detrimental to the decisions that they're making, but it's realistic. There's only a certain amount of hours in the day, and when you're sitting on a caseload of, 50 to 55 clients, which is what a senior guardian generally sits on, and you're making decisions day in and day out, sometimes seeking those views can be very difficult. So, I think that the public guardian does the absolute best with the resources they have. Can I say that with every decision that I ever made at the OPG that I sought the views of the client? No, because some decisions needed to be made quickly, and they were based on information that was given to us by stakeholders. But the public guardian has a decision making framework. It's available on
Yeah.
their website for substituted and supported decision making in their role. And in line with the general principles, all of the decisions have to be made in line with the general principles, the Human Rights Act, the Guardianship and Administration Act, the Disability Services Act. There's a whole range of different acts that they have to have to comply with when they're making decisions. So I think that I could confidently hand on heart say most decisions are made in a person centered way.
Okay. Look, the if Anna was at the desk and able was queen for a day and could write the rules and could say, this is how we're going to do it now. This is how we're going to fund it, attack it, people centered. This is what we're going to, this is the new framework for how we move forward. Let's sort of stick with that robust category because we've been speaking about that this whole conversation so far. So what would you write into the rules? How would you tackle it?
The first thing that I would do is I would say that if the NDIA is funding someone robust SDA, their SIL their SIL ratio must be 1 to 1.
Okay, that sounds like a really sensible, pragmatic, obvious kind of change.
Um,
Yep.
unless the client or the participant is able to give their expressed views to say that they want to live with someone else. People with
Uh huh.
disabilities shouldn't be forced to live with other people because of a funding model.
Right.
I don't have to live with other people if I choose not to. Why is that different? You know, I mean, I understand that there's budgets and there's money and there's funding and that's why they do it. But if I was queen for a day, that would probably be the first thing that I would do. Anyone that's funded robust SDA does not have to live with another person unless they want to.
Okay. That's great. And you know what?
Yeah.
That's been a bit over 20. Would you believe it?
Oh,
We've been
wow.
chatting for 20 minutes.
Oh,
Doesn't it just go like that?
sorry. I hope I
That's
didn't
it.
talk
No,
too
this
much.
is this has been no. It's well, you're a technician. You've got a lot of really technical knowledge, and like I said a moment ago, the way you speak, the authority with which you speak, it's from someone who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt. So thank you for your expertise, and thank you for giving up your morning on holidays. You can go jump in the pool now, or find that
It's
margarita,
been my
whichever you'd like to
abs-
do.
it's been my absolute pleasure, David. Always so lovely to catch up with you. And yeah, it's been a hoot. Thank you for letting me
You're
just there.
welcome. Well, let's look. If you want to come back anytime, maybe we'll do it again in the new year. And because it just goes so quick like that, right? And I'd
Yeah.
love to keep picking your brain and just having conversations like this. And next time, I was sharing with Anna before we started. Normally, Lauren joins us for these podcasts, but she's on an advisory board now for a disability services stakeholder, and they've got a board meeting, so she couldn't be here today.
She's an
She'll be here
amazing
next time.
opportunity to affect change for Lauren as well, which is just
Yeah,
brilliant. Mm.
yeah. Well, thank you again. Enjoy your holiday, and we'll see
Thank
you next
you.
time.
We'll catch up with you soon.